video series where I talk about all the gritty technical details of SaaS and SaaS businesses without really talking so much about the get rich quick or how many Lambos I've got behind me in my garage. So on today's episode, we'll talk about this week I was on Nomad List, which is a Slack that I belong to, just talking about some tech stuff, and we went through the limitations of building a calendar integration SaaS as a technical SaaS. So that means that the customer would be technical as well. And that led into a lot of interesting rabbit holes, and I always love talking about the nuances of technology businesses. So let's get into it.
So we were having a great conversation this week on one of the Slacks that I'm part of, which I can give a shout out at the end. And we got into discussing because one guy wanted to know if he could run a calendar integrations business, which of course the other brand that I work on communally is very interested in. Booking tools have become paramount during COVID, and a lot of businesses swear by them, even if sometimes it makes the customer experience a little less enjoyable for the lack of ability to just have that convenience to walk into a barber shop when you want. And so this has become very interesting to that side of the business, and we talked about calendar integrations for a bit, and what we figured out is that we know that the technical customer is a very hard customer to have, because that customer is constantly going to want to build it their own way, looking for ways to get your service for free, and will try to read your own fine print and not use that against you, but they'll wind up using the tools in a way that's probably not profitable for you. But in this particular case, there would have been a technical limitation, mostly because when we think of calendars, which is where typically booking tools will sync onto your own calendar, that data usually lives on the user customer's own account somewhere. So on like a Microsoft or a Google Calendar, for instance. And the only way to get that data is through OAuth, which means that if he's trying to be a middle tier service provider in technology, well, he would have to approach it one of two ways. He would either have to give a white labeling deal where he allows a customer of his to put the calendar integration software onto their own app that they host, so that when the user's calendar data comes off of their account, it goes straight to the white label customer servers. The problem with that approach is that your white label deals tend to be a little bit larger in size, because if you made it cheap to do white label, people more or less would just run off with your code, and they would just make a competing business, and they would have all kinds of deniability or be in a non-extradition country, and you just wouldn't do that. My statement became that if you're trying to white label software, you want to be above a certain price point to prohibit anyone from getting that kind of idea. But it also takes more of an actual sales cycle to get those white label deals. And I think you need a existing presence in the market, and it just winds up not being a really good way to go into the market chasing a mid-sized business, by relative terms even of a one-person startup, for instance, a user. And then on the other side of this was the idea of the only way to really use his connectivity tool would be to have all of the customers. So because this is a three-party system, you have the guy proposing the idea wanted to be a calendar integration broker, so he has a technology. You have his customer that is presumably integrating booking tools for their customers. So in the case of the other brand I'm working with, Communally, we're trying to help small business book customers for their own businesses. So Communally would be a perfect use case customer for this calendar integrations technical SaaS. But the problem is that there's just no way I could personally see having every single Communally user OAuth more than one app. Well, we might have them OAuth a Communally app, but to have them OAuth more than that wouldn't make sense. We've already covered it not being really viable to have the full calendar integration code given to the customers without white labeling structures. And then on the other side of that, you have some modest data security issues where any data that you, let's say, are pulling off of the user's calendar would flow then to his servers first before, in this case, the Communally brand. So I would be put in that position as a prospective customer to think about, would I want my customers' data flowing to some third party, like their complete private data, and then to me. So you have like those two things kind of counting against this business model.
So because I live near the mountains and generally try not to live on my computer and encourage others to do the same, I wanted this video series to also have some of my adventure clips built into it. I just couldn't get behind the camera and do a bunch of dry content. So this week we went out to Foxton area in Colorado, and we ran some class 4 rapids, which is pretty cool. And yeah, so in the footage, ran a section at the top called Boulder Garden, and then dropped into some pretty heavy flows in the section below the Boulder Garden. So it was a lot of fun. Definitely really important to keep in mind that on the river, it can get pretty cold out there. And for me, investing in a dry suit this season was pretty key. Because once you've caught hypothermia one time, you generally don't want to catch it again. We wound up doing a river rescue where it was mostly just around hypothermia. The clouds that day had crept over midway through our run. But otherwise, it was a pretty safe, fun, flowy run all the way through. All right, so let's get back to talking about technical SaaS.
And so that, led me, by way of another effort into thinking about a SaaS of my own that I wanted to maybe put out there for purchase, but runs up against similar technical challenges. And we don't really see all of these nuances when we first go about an idea. And I think one of the more interesting areas in business is when you have a good product that makes sense, but from a technical or environmental feasibility set of reasons does not make sense. So the tool that I need to start building just for doing these videos is some kind of data synchronization tool. So I've asked videographers what they do in order to cope with the fact that you're often transferring around large file sizes, which can be really painful when it comes to editing video. If you want to go from one device to another, or if you just want to transfer files from, let's say, your camera or phone to your computer. And so because of that, I knew you can't even really, since I tried, you can't even really highlight all your files, let's say off of, for instance, a GoPro device, and then transfer it to your computer. A lot of times what happens, it's OS specific, but it just will, the file transfer process will just stop. It won't have a good resume capability, and it's almost as though, at least in my experience, it's not quite built into the OS. And on the same token, you have some issues when it comes to hypothetically syncing to Amazon S3, where it doesn't necessarily do a great job of allowing you to sync from multiple machines. And if we're talking about Google Drive, that suffers the same issues as the OS. So a lot of these companies, it almost seems like they're advertising mega storage space, but when you kind of get into the nuances, it starts to not look that way. So another example of this is actually, as I started evaluating, okay, well, could I roll this data sync as a storage as a service and do a similar technical SaaS play, just kind of as an add-on to what SaaSworks is offering, started to get into the nuances again. So the main problems would be that, if your backup mechanisms are either Google Drive or S3, from a customer perspective, most people are going to prefer Google Drive. And the other nice thing about Google Drive, which I'll kind of cover and loop back to in a second, is that you don't have to deal with these egress fees that Amazon charges you. So in other words, the numbers that I looked up is that if you egress, and I suppose I should talk about what egress and ingress are in a second, but if you egress I think it was 200 or 100 terabytes per month, you're going to pay $200 to Amazon just in egress fees. So what is egress? So egress and ingress is just data coming in and out of the network. And so this is one of those kind of more nuanced details of AWS, is that you have this concept of you can shove data into AWS's cloud. You cannot take data out without paying for it. And that's just something that you don't really get advertised or think about up front. Just like how Google Drive seems to promise, lots of storage, but then like you download Google's sync tools and they aren't that good. They don't seem to run continuously, and they seem they seem to have updated the tools, and I just did not find them to be a satisfying experience. Not a lot of customization. You get one folder to work with, and so going back to the business side of this, if you look at Amazon where you have egress fees and you know that you're going to pay $200 a month, or let's say $2,000 a month for 1,000 terabytes of data, and imagine you have 1,000 users, each are egressing or uploading or moving around a terabyte of data per month, which seems like it may be a large amount of data, but the type of user that would buy this service maybe is like a video editor. So 1 terabyte per user. And that means that basically your base cost just in egress fees, I think might be like $2 a month. And so you kind of think like, what would someone pay for this? And I think your price point is probably around $2 to $5 a month. And so that means you're either charging the customer, so you can do your cost of goods, a number that's quite a bit over $2 a month. So maybe like $10 a month for data sync, but we all know you can just like pay and get that on like, some of the services like Apple Cloud or Google Cloud. And also we have to also mention the other reason for this type of tool is just the problem of data transferability between these services. If you want to use mixed media for your storage and not just, I have Apple Sync, iCloud Sync, and I just honestly, and I have GoPro Sync as well. Like these businesses seem to be premised on, they want you to buy their cloud storage, but then they just don't really even discuss getting your data from one cloud to another. And in many cases for videographers, they want that cheap cost of getting the data into the cloud and out of the cloud, and they want at least some kind of copy on their computer so they can do video editing and cuts. But the even crazier part is if you start to look at like social media, like it's almost like you look at the cost of transferring video to your computer, and and then you hear stories from people about how on like Instagram, if you don't shoot in their, making a video with their tools, they'll actually algorithmically be less likely to show you. So if they know you edited in GoPro Quick, or you edited in After Effects, like they will be less likely to rank you than if you used their tools. So there's a lot of like odd things going in the marketplace, which kind of like, I think we all know at the end of the day, if you have control over, how your data is moved around and it's convenient and it's affordable, you're going to be most often in a better position. And if you can automate it and make it always run in the background, and it's just, in my experience, the tools to do this, and even asking videographers, a lot of them say they just stick it all on an external hard drive, which, like, again, unless you're moving files around each time you shoot, like, you're sitting there watching an OS meter like trickle across your screen, and maybe it finishes, maybe it craps out. That doesn't seem like the OSs are even building a lot of resume capability, because they were designed in a time when, we weren't moving around a terabyte of data every month. And so if we circle back to Drive and the experience of this business, so we know on the AWS side, you're either charging the user like $10 a month and you're paying for the egress fees, assuming that they, don't transfer 10 terabytes a month and break the bank for you. So that's one option. And then the other option is that you would run it through Google Drive, which would run into the same OAuth issues as the guy proposing the calendar integration technical SaaS, which is that you're now in a 3-party system. So you have the Google, in this case, being the file storage host that the customer has an account with. So they're paying for the storage fees. You have, in this case, it would be SaaSworks selling the storage service. And then, of course, the customer and their data. And it's a little bit different in that SaaSworks would just sell it directly. There's not like SaaSworks trying to have other people sell this storage service. So it kind of removes that pitfall. But on the side of how would you get users to use this? So the unfortunate thing about egress fees is that whereas you would nicely have a server sitting on Amazon, you have the customer just upload to that Amazon server, and then Amazon nicely, your server sitting on Amazon nicely distributes those files to S3 and to Drive. Because of egress fees, just getting it to Drive would be problematic. And so what you'd probably have to do is a direct upload to Google Drive, which kind of gets into that same white labeling problem of you just have all the code sitting on someone's computer, and you could try to do things like anti-piracy measures, and you could try to, especially with the type of code that SaaSworks works with, it's all readable. You're not compiling it. It's just not from a business point of view to lock that software down. It for one reason or another, and these reasons are always or often nuanced. This is how the web has evolved, and I think many business owners would look at that and say, I know I need this tool for myself. I know I haven't found it out there in the market, but I would probably write it off and say, okay, I'm better off just pushing this out in the market, making it probably free, and then that becomes a marketing funnel. Is probably honestly how I and many other business owners would look at this. And I think we bundle this topic all the way back up and say it's really interesting, these kinds of nuances that make things the way that they are, and often create for business reasons, more often than not, business or legal, kind of technical decisions, or it could be because of a technical constraint, or that even if an idea is good as a product, that it's just from maybe a business point of view or a legal point of view or a technical point of view, it's just not a product that worth pursuing. And I think that's just such an interesting topic, because it's just so often, those are often the areas where you learn the most. So that, if someone were to sit down with you and kind of run through your day-to-day or decision-making, and all the different things you'd pathfind would typically be not to go into those technical risks or constraints or business or legal constraints. And it's just, there's so many things like that out there. And so let me know if you experience anything like that, and if you want to join in the conversation about some of these more subtle nuances that are out there when it comes to making software products.